So we're going to take a look at the last two principles for designing e-learning, the personalization principle and the segmentation and control guidelines. First, I want to say that the personalization principle is one of the most critical of the principles in terms of the learning outcomes. Here you see a table with the principles listed that we've discussed, and the multimedia principle has the highest effect size. In other words, the most positive effect on learning, and that of course is where graphics are used, good graphics, to illustrate concepts rather than just text alone. But personalization is not far behind, and personalization involves having an actual social presence behind the learning. So let's just take a look at the definition. So there's a body of research that suggests that learners will learn better when there is some sort of a social presence behind this. And this can be done in a couple of different ways in asynchronous e-learning, where you don't actually have a human being in real time delivering the instruction. The two areas that have been researched are having a conversational and polite tone to the text and audio, and then having some sort of a learning agent on screen, a coach of some kind that appears in the e-learning. And again, these have been shown to have a powerful effect on learning. So just to illustrate, I could have said the same thing I did in the last slide, which is now grayed out, in a personalized way. Here's an on-screen coach. Here's a conversational way of saying the same thing I said in the last slide. And research suggests that this would be a better way to deliver the instruction in an e-learning environment, an asynchronous e-learning environment. In terms of coaches on screen, the package that you'll be using called Articulate Rise to develop interactive e-learning, you'll have a variety of characters that you can actually insert into your instruction. And here's a couple of examples. One is an illustrated coach, One is an actual photographic coach. But there's not a difference between the two in terms of the outcomes in learning. Now, on-screen coaches can deliver the narrative. Through for example, speech bubbles and things of that nature, or they can do it through audio. They're not actually talking, they're just on the screen. They can direct the learning and say, okay, go to section such and such next. They can provide hints along the way, and they can be the ones that deliver the feedback when interaction is asked for by the learner. Again, there's no difference if they're real or animated. That has not been found in the literature, so it doesn't seem to matter. A few conversational style tips. When writing text for e-learning, use the first and second person and use an active voice. I'll give you a couple of examples in a moment, but the phrasing should be friendly and polite. In fact, you read a research-based article last week on using polite phrasing and how positive the effect was on learning. But if we go over here and take a look at two examples of tutorials on Audacity, this is the first version, and you can see that this is written in a very formal way. Now the student will click on Export as MP3 to create this recording in MP3 format. This is rewritten down here in a second person voice that's more friendly. We want to create this recording as an MP3 file. You can click on Export as MP3 to begin. So this is just an illustration of the difference between the phrasings. When writing for e-learning, asynchronous e-learning, it's better to use direct statements rather than indirect statements. So here are some examples of that. A direct statement would be find the common denominator, whereas indirect statement same statement would be, this might be a good time to find a common denominator. The difference is that this is a directive, and this gives the learner the opportunity or option of doing it. Now, is there really a difference? Well, in terms of how the learner feels as they go through the instruction, this indirect language has been shown to be much more effective. So you let the learner decide, or have the illusion of deciding, what they want to do next, rather than giving directives. All right, a little bit about segmentation. Segmentation is breaking the content down into logical segments, and then putting those segments into sort of a table of contents. An example, I will jump down here for a moment. Here is a table of contents on the left side, and the learner can absorb the information in each of these little segments. This happens to be a nursing, e-learning, asynchronous e-learning package on hygiene. But at any rate, you can see how it's segmented, and the learner is able to jump from one topic to the other. They don't have to go from 1 down to 23. Now, the e-learning designer probably intended for the learner to go from 1 to 23, but they're given the option of jumping around. So this is a control issue. They're given control over the order of the instruction and the pace of the instruction as well. So that's a decision that has to be made by e-learning developers. So do we want to give the learner control over the pace of the segments? There are two options for that. There is program control, where the program actually forces the learner to do the instruction in a particular order. Or there's learner control, which I just shared with you, where the learner is able to jump around a little bit and decide what they want to learn next. These are decisions that have to be made. In most cases, from what I've seen, there's a combination of the two. Here's another example showing the different segments of content on a table of contents, and the learner has control to jump from segment to segment, and they aren't forced to do it in a particular order. Now, they could be forced to do it. It is how the e-learning ends up being designed. All right, here's a few of the research suggestions for control. We want to give experienced learners more control and less experienced learners less control. Generally speaking, the more advanced the learner, the more experienced they are in learning, the more control you want to give. And so for young children, it's been found that less control is better. Adult learners like us, we find that, and which is most training is done for, we find that more control is better in terms of the learning outcomes. The subject complexity plays a part. If it's a very, very complex subject, that let's say you're introducing programming to somebody, a new programming language, there might be a very specific order that somebody needs to learn in, and they shouldn't be jumping around to something that they don't understand before they do something before you understand the idea. So complexity plays a big part in it as well. When control is given, make skipping practice a deliberate choice. So when interactive questions are embedded into the instruction, the learner should either be able to skip the practice by doing a forward button or something like that, or not. It just needs to be thought of by the instructional designer. Reducing external links is important. You'll see some training with a lot of external links embedded in it, and that should be minimized, except for more experienced learners, because it clutters up the instruction to some extent. So I am also posting a link to a couple of different e-learning modules that have been done with Articulate Rise, which is the software, the online software that you'll be using, and you'll be able to see how these different e-learning packages, asynchronous e-learning packages, have been designed. Think about the personalization, the multimedia, the coherence, these types of things as you look at some of these examples.